Hello and welcome, my erudite friends, to another edition of MonteCristo's Power Rankings, the Thinking Fans Power Rankings. This is our second episode of the 2023 season, and for the first time, we are going to be seeing a Western team crack the top 10. That's right, it's G2. You thought it might be FlyQuest for a second, but of course it's not. They're from LCS. All right, well, let's get things started off with our number 10 team of the week. It is KT Rolser. Now, KT was threatening to climb up these power rankings, but of course, in true KT fashion, they had to disappoint us with a 0-4 week versus Dplus and T1. I think primarily what we learned about KT this week is that if they don't have Karma, or Jax, or Sejuani, they look substantially worse than they do against those champions. We got a glimpse of that in the Dplus games, where they actually managed to first pick Karma on blue side, Dplus did, taking it away from KT, and then all three of those champions were rapidly banned by T1 in their second set. I actually don't think that they played too terribly badly against T1 in particular, but T1 is just an otherworldly force at the current point in time, and I don't think many teams in the world really have what it takes to even compete with them. KT also continues to have questionable drafts, not in the sense that the drafts are inherently bad, but in the sense that these aren't champions that KT are necessarily good at. They spent a lot of time this past week attempting to play Lucian and Nami, which really has not been the strength of KT's bot lane throughout this season. And I think overall I was pretty negative on their team compositions because it didn't go to how we've seen KT win. Rather, it felt like they were trying to steal their opponent's picks or deny them, but KT was also incapable of using these same champions or combinations of champions, and so we saw a disappointing week. I do think that they will potentially bounce back, but right now they do have to fall down the rankings. At number 9, we have our Western entrant, which of course is G2. G2 is certainly, as we've seen from the playoffs, a cut above the other LEC teams. Now, it is interesting to shadowbox them against some of the best teams that we've seen in the world so far. And although I don't think that they will necessarily be competing with either the 1 or 2 seeds from China or Korea at MSI, still a lot of gameplay left, in fact an entire extra spring split in the LEC and virtually half a split plus playoffs in both of the Asian regions. Plus we now know that MSI is going to be on patch 3.13.6, so there could be a break in terms of the patches for them. But if there were to be an international tournament right now, I think G2 could probably compete with some of the maybe 5th or 4th teams in LCK or LPL, but hard to imagine them really breaking into the top 2 or maybe even top 3. And the reason we say that is because they do have some very defined strength. Caps is a world-class mid laner when he's on form. Their bottom lane looks very refreshingly aggressive and dominant. Mikyx, for me, is the MVP of the LEC, and he's been doing an amazing job not only winning lane with Hansama, but also roaming on champions that we don't even really expect to have success roaming like Heimerdinger, but he's managing to pull it off all the same. They also have run a variety of different kill lanes with Jarvan support. We know they're very strong with the Draven as well. So there's a lot of ability for this team to compete in lane, certain lanes, with the best teams in the world, potentially snowball and at least make things competitive. I think their other big strength is that they have unorthodox picks, which teams will not be used to practicing against. And not only are these picks unorthodox, but they are able to flex unorthodox picks like Kled, which we saw in the finals, into a variety of different positions. So this team is really fun to watch, it's very skilled, but if I had to make a criticism, I think G2 is not being punished when they do make mistakes. Teams that are able to get up on G2 early will be able to close out the game without throwing. I think if we think about the Mad Lions series that they played in game number 3, Chasey was very far ahead in that top lane, and Mad Lions more or less fumbled when they attempted to play through that top lane and snowball the game. I think that was a very winnable game for Mad Lions. I think if you put many of the top teams in the world in that exact situation, they are able to come out with a win in that game. Broken Blade as well has had some struggles against very good top laners like Chasey within the LEC. And if we imagine him playing against somebody like Zeus or 369, I think we start to believe that top lane might be a little bit underpowered when it comes to the international scene. At number 8, we do have Dplus. I was very down on Dplus, particularly after Showmaker's interview with Ashley Kong, where he said that he was more or less burnt out, and that really showed in his play. He wasn't as crisp as usual. His macro sense, which I think has long been one of Showmaker's best attributes, where to be on the map, how to roam, how to empower Canyon, how to get into his side lanes, how to team fight well. These were not looking so hot this season on the whole. And I'm really glad to see that Showmaker did turn in a 3-death week, basically. So he only died 3 times across the games that they played against KT and the Guangdong Freaks. They did lose 0-2 to Liiv SANDBOX since our last power rankings, which did bump them down just a little bit. But it also just feels like the meta is trending in Dplus's favor. Showmaker not getting caught out and giving up Barons while he's split pushing, which was a hallmark of why they were losing games previously. But also, now that Canyon is able to play more of these early game dominant junglers, and we see the Lee Sin coming back into play. He's had some very good games on Nidalee, and Nidalee is a fringe meta pick right now. If you are a good team and capable of snowballing it, I think it is at least pickable, and it is winnable, as we've seen from Canyon, certain LPL junglers as well. Owner, also on T1, has used it to great effect. They still maybe have some late game macro issues. Kana does seem to have a limited viable champion pool, and arguably one of the reasons they did so well against KT was that he was given Renekton twice, which I believe he's undefeated on this season. Certainly his best champion this season by far. So I'm not sold on Dplus yet, but it was really refreshing to see that bounce back. Again, this is a team that, if the jungle changes that have been hinted on go through, and we do see counter jungling become more viable again, perhaps farming instead of ganking becoming a little bit more viable again, this will allow Canyon to power up and be more of a late game carry threat and use his extremely good sense of pathing in order to start to crush his opponents. This might be a very good sign for Dplus as the patches go towards MSI. At 7, we have Liiv SANDBOX. Liiv, in between the time of the last power ranking and this one, has now lost twice to T1. There was a close affair where they were able to take a game in the first best of 3 before a reverse sweep by T1, but it was an absolute blowout in the second match. They did at least come off a dominant win versus Dplus, but Liiv, while being a solid team, doesn't appear to have the greatest versatility, and I think, especially in the top lane, Birdal has been rather inconsistent. Sometimes he's been very good, sometimes he really struggles, and I think he was one of the primary factors that caused them to get behind in the early game, despite his counter picks of Azir top lane into Gnar, which he got actually just solo killed by Zeus in that matchup and looked pretty bad in that process. It's something that he attempted to play when he was on Damwon last year versus T1 in Game 5 of the T1 versus Damwon Spring playoffs. Part of that kind of wacky comp with Yasuo mid and Heimerdinger ADC before Heimerdinger was really a bot laner. It was definitely a kind of tricky comp that they were running. Didn't work then, definitely didn't work this time around in this regular season matchup. Closer continues to shine on melee mids, and Envy's ability to carry in the late game and his laning phase keeps getting better. He is becoming a very big bright spot on this roster, and Willer remains one of the top junglers within the league. So they have a solid floor, but I'm just not sure if they're going to be able to really hang with some of the better teams like GenG, like T1, unless we see some more dimensionalization and growth from their players. Number 6, Weibo Gaming. All right, Weibo is kind of a confusing team because on the one hand, we've seen them take out JDG in what was a very impressive win, but we also saw them lose 0-2 to LNG in what was a sloppy affair. They really do seem to play to the level of their teammates. Both Karsa and the Shy have been inconsistent. The Shy, although even when he's kind of bad in lane, he still is very relevant in team fights, as we saw in their series versus JDG. Light and Crisp are a very legit bot lane at this point in time. I really like watching these guys play. Light is flying under the radar right now, I feel, as one of the better AD carries in the LPL. He's more of a standard, play it safe, play it conservative, team fight ADC, but he really has rock-solid fundamentals, and I don't think we're going to see a lot of crazy outplays from this guy, but he's really consistent in terms of his DPS from his team fight positioning, and overall just, very, very good ADC, and they absolutely have to have some level of consistency with the Shy and Karsa playing like they are. Crisp is still an excellent support as well, so Weibo does have a solid foundation to build off of, but it seems like their form really varies from week to week based on how Karsa and how the Shy are doing, and we've seen some really kind of brutally bad macro games as the one they played against LNG showed. Number 5, EDG. EDG is rising up the rankings because they are one of, if not the best macro team in China right now. They beat JDG. They had a close series versus Top. And a lot of the roster moves that people may have been skeptical on during the offseason, obviously losing Viper, losing Scout were huge blows to this team. But Liiv has really stepped up, and I'm not going to say that he is Viper and that this is going to be a top 2 team within the LPL, because I don't think they have the individual players to accomplish that. They're more than the sum of their parts, and for being a rookie, Liiv has actually been really quite good. He still makes some rookie mistakes, still gets caught out. He's sort of analogous to Pays, but for his relative inexperience at the very top professional level, I think he's been very strong. And this is also bolstered by the fact that Ale moving over from LNG has been incredibly legit, especially on in the Jax and the top side for EDG. GenG has been very good, and we saw him completely out-jungle Kanavi when they played JDG. And Fofo has been just a very solid mid laner and playing the champions that they need and doing a very good job, particularly on Syndra. This team is not the prototypical kind of outplay you, outskirmish you LPL team. They really are a very cohesive unit, and for a team that lost perhaps their 2 best players during the offseason, the fact that they are this competitive right now is a very good sign. They're a team that I really enjoy and I think could continue to scale up as the year goes on, and it's a team that I really hope to see at the World Championship later. At number 4, we have Top Esports. This position was obviously going to be dictated by whomever won the JDG versus Top game from this past week. That was JDG that ended up winning. So I think Top has been a bit more consistent against the field, and they did actually pull off a solid win against EDG. They lost the big matchup that mattered, and while it was a very fun series to watch, there were 2 30-minute games that they lost. Their draft was kind of a big problem. In the second game of the series, they got baited into playing a Draven and Victor, and JDG very cleverly decided to get the Gangplank, Syndra, Renata Glask, Varus into it. It made it so Draven and Victor could never really close the gap to deal damage into that composition, and so Game 2 felt more or less like a wash, even though Game 1 was much more competitive. I think we're also starting to see some of the issues around Top Esports if we have to really nitpick one of the best teams in the world. Qingtian in particular played tanks into JDG. That didn't work as well as some of the very flashy plays and some of his high performances on champions like Darius or K'Sante. We start to wonder what his level of flexibility is when he might have to play tanks versus very, very good teams around the world. I think that Tian is having a very good season. Rookie is also having a very good season despite coming off of that break. They've been the most solid and stable players on this roster. Jackie Love is Jackie Love. You gotta take his highs with the lows. We've seen some good games, we've seen some bad games. He struggled a bit when it came to playing against Ruler on JDG, but he is still an excellent AD carry. Top is, unless something dramatically changes, they still have the personnel to continue to be in the very upper echelons of World Play and the LPL. I anticipate that we'll probably see at least one best of 5 between Top and JDG during the LPL playoffs. They have a very robust bracket with double elimination. There's a good possibility we see 2 best of 5s, one before the finals and then, of course, in the finals itself between these two teams. And they think both them and JDG are clearly the kings of the LPL right now. LPL does feel a bit top-heavy between JDG, Top Esports, Weibo, EDG, and then kind of LNG sitting on the fringes. I know some of you guys might look at LNG and say, oh, they're #1 team in the LPL. Go ahead and look at their schedule. They literally have to play all of the other good teams in the LPL left in the season, so we're going to learn a lot about LNG in the next couple of weeks. Number 3, we have GenG. GenG did play a close series versus T1. It was certainly a winnable series for them. However, I also think that T1 really hit an even higher form in the past week. So GenG played them 2 weeks ago and kind of got them in a form that I would say is a little bit worse than what we've seen from T1 now. GenG has been rolling through bottom teams. Their schedule in the last week hasn't been particularly difficult. And they've had some really positive developments. I think Doran has been better overall this season. He's excellent at absorbing pressure in the top lane. He does have versatility, whether he can play carries or tanks. He's not going to be that pinnacle carry top laner that we might see from players like Zeus, for example, but he can still use those champions and use them pretty well when the comp demands it, even if he's not going to be at the apex of carry top laners. The bot lane continues to improve. We've talked about this a lot. Pays has developed really, really fast for a rookie player. Every game we see he's making fewer and fewer rookie mistakes to supplement the fact that his laning and team fighting were already very good, basically right from the get-go when he became a professional player at the start of the season. Big shoes to fill with Ruler, but he's doing the best he can. And GenG's macro continues to be their strength. This team is so good at allocating players to lane, at teleporting to sync waves, at minion wave manipulation in order to apply pressure and take objectives, so good at taking away your jungle. We even see them playing unorthodox picks with kind of a fringe jungle pick and Poppy coming in back out in Peanut's hand that final game versus T1. He is the consummate Poppy player. He made Poppy meta worldwide last year. I really have a lot of faith in GenG. I do think it'll be very unusual if we don't see a GenG versus T1 and a relatively competitive final. At number 2. Now, if I had made a power ranking in between this one and the last one, JDG probably would have fallen down the list. But here they are, again at number 2, because they come back and they beat Top. And that's really the most important opponent that they have to beat. They have bounced back from some bad losses, and their losses have been caused by, interestingly, some really questionable performances by Ruler and Kanavi in particular, depending on the series, where they have put their teams in holes or thrown team fights that have cost them games and series. But they looked very good against Top Esports. They have a lot of versatility. Again, we touched on this roster, this team comp that they played in Game 2 versus Top Esports. The Gangplank, Syndra, Varus, Renata, Glask. It made it really, really hard for the Victor and the Draven to play that game on Top Esports the longer the game went on. These champions had to walk into all of this either poke or zone control with Gangplank barrels or Renata Glask ult, and it really made it almost impossible, I feel, for Top Esports to win that game. JDG had a very clear idea of their win conditions, even if they didn't have the most optimal lanes because of these picks, but they were able to hold down the lanes long enough to reach mid-game objectives where the comp came online versus what Top was fielding. I think Kanavi will also be a player that benefits from a movement towards early game junglers. His team fighting on Lee Sin this past week was really second only to Owner on T1, and Owner is also an exceptional Lee Sin player. So JDG feels like they will potentially be even stronger on future patches. Remember, JDG was the team that was already dominating lanes with losing lane matchups and then ending games when they're at their peak at 22 minutes into the game. when JDG has been on form and their lanes are winning, they have been absolutely crushingly dominant. And it's really just, they have so many good players on this roster, and pound for pound, they are so strong that they will just be able to outmuscle most of the other teams in the world, and there are only a few that are going to be able to stand up to the individual skill differences that JDG is able to put out there. And number one this week, I think this is a very convincing number one right now. T1 has only lost to Hanhwa Life. They're coming off an incredibly dominant week against Liiv SANDBOX, against KT Rolser. They continue to debut new picks. Before we saw Mad Lions pull out the mid Gragas, it was Faker pulling out the mid Gragas. And this is exactly how T1 likes to play, guys. They'll play mid Gragas with Lucian and Nami. What they do is the Gragas is meant to be a safe mid lane choice where you can get through the mid lane, you can start to roam into the side lanes, and by the time you get to the mid game, Faker as a flank, he's throwing a cask out, he's separating somebody on the enemy team so that Gumayushi can 100-0 them, pick them off, and they'll fight in these little skirmishes. T1 loves pick compositions. They love skirmish compositions. They want to fight you in small groups, or they want to hit you when you can't even see that they're coming. They want to 100-0 you with a Chain of Corruption from Varus, with a Caitlyn ultimate and a Nidalee Spear all hitting you at the same time and killing one of your squishy champion. They are so good at this style of play, and it is very, 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 very hard to force a true front-to-back 5v5 versus T1. They will catch you in the rotation, they have better vision control, they know how to pick you off, they are exceptional at this. Also, Owner. He is now 40 wins and 5 losses lifetime, if we include both LCK and international tournaments, on Lee Sin. He had an absolutely incredible game versus Liiv SANDBOX. I would highly encourage everybody to go to Game 2 of Liiv SANDBOX versus T1 and take a look at just how coordinated this team is. From the mid dives that they were pulling off with Gragas and Lee Sin, to killing Envy in Dragon Pit when he has both summoners up. He's a fed Ezreal with flash and heal up. Owner comes over the back of the Dragon Pit, kicks him once, that then chains into Yasuo coming in from the edge of the vision into the river, getting an ult off while Caitlyn ults him and while Jhin ults him during the Yasuo ult. He instantly dives with both sums up. It is incredible the plays that this team sees, and the eye test on T1 right now is absolutely bonkers. From an individual perspective, you can make an argument for every player in their position, like a legitimate argument for every player in their position being at the top of their roles within the LCK. Now, obviously, there are going to be some other instances to this. Maybe Faker's not the best mid laner. We do have Chovy, who has been performing very well. Maybe Gumayushi isn't the best AD carry with the way that Viper has been performing. But at the very least, they're all top 3 in their roles, and I think that's pretty indisputable. This is a big difference from their 18-0 in spring last year, where I thought they had some obvious flaws. They are just capable of making plays, and the level of trust and synergy is just so high right now that they will follow up on almost anything, and their hands are so good they can outplay you in a micro sense. That's why they love these pick comps. That's why they love the skirmish comps, because they want to pull you apart into 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s, or have a man advantage and win the game that way. This team is absolutely amazing to watch right now. If you're a top laner, Zeus probably had he had the best week he's had so far in 2023, worth watching all of his games for that reason. Playing Yasuo top and dominating, playing Gragas, playing Gnar top and dominating. He was incredible taking out both Burdal and Keen this week, and especially with how Keen's been performing, it makes it even more impressive that Zeus was able to do so well. If MSI was played today, I think T1 rushes MSI. I don't think it's particularly close. Now, we have a lot of patches between now and MSI. There's a whole, basically, third of a split left plus playoffs, so we have to give some time for other teams to develop. Maybe T1 will be held back just a little bit. But it is hard to foresee a meta right now, considering the strengths of all of their players and the depth of their champion pools, where T1 would not be able to succeed, especially because they've been playing this style across a variety of different metas now for what is effectively a year, since they started to develop this pick and skirmish style halfway through Spring Split of 2022. So there's our top 10 for this week. Thank you very much for joining me for my power rankings. I'll see you again in another 2 weeks.